Good morning to you early stalwarts of the day. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you're not using this just as an opportunity to wake up. Anyway, without further ado, I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Andrew McClelland from IMRG and also the Data Project. But I'm delighted to be welcome Pranav with us. Pranav, would you like to say who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, I'd also like to share Andrew's thanks to all of you making the graveyard shift, which is the first time I've ever had a graveyard shift as the first session of the day. My name is Pranav. I am the exec GM for EMEA for a business called Airwallex. Airwallex is a payments platform for global businesses. We help our customers to collect, convert, send, and spend money around the world. We do an awful lot in e-commerce and in cross-border commerce in general. So really excited to dig in a bit with Andrew today.
So where we're coming from this morning is, there's lots of people here that will talk to you about doing cross-border. One of the issues that we're talking about is what Airwallex are calling the conversion trap. And actually what we're talking about now is how you can make the most of trading cross-border, but also minimize some of the risks that are associated with doing that. So I think one of the first things we can start talking about is actually the customer experience and how we are, yes, we're internationalizing as businesses, but how do we become more local? So would you pick up on that?
Yeah, sure. Can I do a quick straw poll of those of you in the audience? How many of you are e-commerce sellers, or how many of you are selling online? Okay, cool. It's roughly half. And the rest of you guys, are you in the ecosystem? In the ecosystem. Okay, cool. Yeah, so look, those of you who are selling online will feel this acutely, but one of the things that we see an awful lot, even now, is people trying to get their customers to pay in ways and in currencies that they don't want to or they don't prefer to pay. And so I think one of the kind of hallmarks and the touchstones of how we like to think about cross-border commerce is starting with your customer, starting with the currencies that they want to pay in, starting with the payment methods that they want to offer, and also starting with a checkout that actually makes sense for them to be able to navigate those two things in a way that doesn't drive too much complexity.
And I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for is a simple solution for customers so they can feel comfortable that actually the payment isn't the barrier for the conversion, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think all of you guys know this, right? The last 2-3 years has seen a huge move onto online commerce from in-store. And the initial wave of that was very much focused on let's just figure out how to accept payments full stop. I think we've now got to the second wave, which is let's optimize those payments, both for acceptance, but also for cost as well. And so that, I think, is the key bit to focus on.
And I think so when we're trading cross-border, we're sourcing product from country A, we're possibly selling it in country B, but we're based in country C. So what you can start seeing is we're going from dollars to euros to sterling and back again, backwards and forwards, with obviously Forex risk involved in that. Now, what can we do about that risk? How can we manage that risk?
Yeah, I'll just be pretty direct. Given that it's a small audience, I'll just be transparent. Payments businesses make money in 3 ways, fundamentally. Number 1 is they obscure the way that they make money. Number 2 is they take risks that other people don't want to take. And number 3 is they find ways to intermediate risks in a more effective or economic way than other people can afford. Most of the way that people make money in e-commerce is by obscuring how they're really making money. And so for us, as we think about how we can change that, what do we want to do? First and foremost, create some transparency so that when you're accepting a payment, you're not being forced to convert that into another currency without being aware of how much you're paying for the privilege of doing so. Secondly, we wanted to be able to give you the optionality to convert when you want to do so at a price that you can actually understand and actually see. And then thirdly, we want to give you the optionality to be able to pay out to your suppliers or to your employees around the world via local rails and in the currencies that those counterparties need. And I think, going back to your point, our whole thing is we want to try and avoid what we call the conversion trap, which is a situation where, as an e-commerce seller or an online brand, you're being forced to convert at the point when you collect into your settlement currency, and then forced to convert again from your settlement currency into whatever currencies that you're paying out around the world. What we often see is that people that we're talking to, even very sophisticated e-commerce sellers, don't even have the visibility of how much they're paying in the first instance. And when you break it down with them, what you can often uncover is that cost is 2 to 4% of your transaction value coming in and going out, which to my mind is absolutely crazy in today's day and age that you should be handling that kind of cost.
And certainly eating into already very slim margins anyway. Now, you mentioned a term in there, payment rails. Could you just explain what you mean by payment rails?
Yeah, so payment rails are the. It's a great question. It's like charades or something. I need to act it out.
We always use the term.
We always
don't
use
we?
the term. We never explain it. So the payment rails are the infrastructure that exists in different countries to be able to allow parties to transact with one another. So, for example, in the UK, we have a scheme called BACS. In the US, there's a scheme called ACH. In the Eurozone, it's called SEPA. Things like that we refer to as payment rails, and they're basically infrastructure that allows money to move between counterparties.
But basically, they're in the denomination of those territories.
Yeah, so again, when you think about making payments around the world, there are really two ways that people do it. One is via SWIFT, which many of you will be aware of. It's a very complex and cumbersome correspondent banking system. The other one is by using local payment methods, which leverage local clearinghouses in different markets around the world and allow you to be able to transact in the right currency and often at a much, much, much greater speed.
So as a merchant based in the UK, selling into the US, actually I've got US dollar transactions. I've then got the Forex to sterling to get it into my bank account. And then what we're talking about then is how we reduce the risk paying our suppliers' bills, if you like.
Yeah, let's actually just break it down, because I think it's maybe better to illustrate it as an example. Imagine you're selling an item for $100 in the US and you're a UK-based merchant. Now, if you sell that item for $100, you're going to often be forced to convert it back into your home currency, which is pound sterling. And so you're going to lose a portion of that ticket price in the conversion costs coming back in. So your $100 goes down to whatever, 95 or something in the UK in pounds again. Now, you then have to convert it back into dollars or into euros to pay it out again. And again, if you're using something like SWIFT, you're having to pay an additional fee on top, which is something between $25 and $50 just to make an individual payment, which is completely crazy. So if you think about how you do it with someone like Airwallex, effectively what we're saying is you collect in dollars, you settle in dollars, you pay out in dollars, you do it in local currency via local rails. It's almost, in often cases it's instant, and when it's not instant, it's very, very fast. And so you cut out all of that inefficiency and fat from the transaction lifecycle.
And in fact, you've got a lot of international suppliers that would prefer to trade in dollars anyway, so you're leveling the playing field a little.
Exactly, and I don't know if you guys are seeing the same thing, but a lot of people are talking about deglobalization at the moment. What we're really seeing is something more like reglobalization, which is people moving from where they've been transacting before into new offshore hubs. And what's kind of common to those offshore hubs is that they transact typically in the major currencies of the world, so sterling, USD, euro, etc. And again, from our point of view, we want to give customers the optionality to be able to use those currencies in the ways that they need to do.
And actually, you touched on an important point there around geopolitical changes and how politics are moving where products are being made and supplied from. We're talking about introducing some risk management by having, being able to hedge some of that risk around foreign exchange. But how are we going to, in effect, adapt to those local changes in, say, those total markets of Europe? So you've got euros, you've got sterling. What we're then trying to do is have redundancies when things break. So all of a sudden you move fulfillment from one territory to another. You're still supplying into the UK and Europe, but actually you've suddenly moved from China to Malaysia, for example. How are you then reducing that risk? And if something goes wrong, how do you introduce redundancy?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, right? I think many people over the last few years have rushed to try and build payment infrastructure, and in doing so, they've just picked one route to market or one banking partner in a particular geography or region. And what you see in the best-in-class providers, and I'd love to say Airwallex are one of those, is that they've built pretty deep infrastructure, which means that when you look at a given region, you have multiple different options, or even in a particular country, you have multiple different options. So you take the US, for example, because we've been talking about it, we have 5 different banking partners in the US, and we have the ability to route transactions in different places if we need to do so. And so I think you're looking at redundancy both in the context of a particular market, but also within a region, wanting to know, do you actually have coverage of the relevant geographies in that region? So should, for example, manufacturing move from China to Malaysia or Singapore to Vietnam, how does that impact my ability to actually make the payments I want to?
So let's bring it back to sort of like the commercial perspective. As a customer, as a retail customer, how would that affect me making that transaction initially? So I go to a merchant, what am I going to see that's going to make it easier for me to pay?
I think you want to see a really clean checkout. I mean, ultimately, that's what consumers care about more than anything else, which is they want to see a checkout which shows them the currencies that they need to pay in, the payment methods that they recognize and trust, and all of that in a way that doesn't overwhelm them with complexity. So I know some of you have probably seen the kind of checkouts where people have put 30 different payment methods on there, and as a consumer, your mind is blown because you don't, you're trying to figure out is there a reason why all these different choices have been given to me, what's the cost difference, yada, yada, yada. Whereas what you really want is something that's clean, something that's secure, and something that's easy for you to navigate in a way that you recognize. And again, when you look at the best-in-class providers, they should give you the optionality to be able to do that, either with a hosted page where you really don't have to do very much development yourself, with a kind of slightly more customizable page with drop-in elements, or with a fully native flow. So depending on your level of sophistication, you can pick the right entry point to be able to get the right checkout experience for your customer.
And actually what we're talking about there is quite an important point as well, where there's a drive towards single page checkout. So it's fewer steps for the customer. But then we are meeting some internal resistance because you've got me as a commercial person that wants to do it in one way and reduce the obstacles to purchase, but my CFO wants to do something entirely different. How can we look at reducing some of those internal challenges, some of those silos?
I don't really see that too often, actually. I'd love to hear more about where the CFO has a desire to add more friction into the checkout flow. I think from the point of view of internally aligning, the key thing is, as commercial people, always to be clear about the metrics that you're focused on. And typically, all of us care about conversion, all of us care about auth rates, all of us care about, cart abandonment and all that kind of stuff. And the more that we can show that the way that we're building the checkout optimizes for those, metrics, the easier it is, I think, to get the internal alignment. And again, we're seeing more and more adoption of, one-click checkout type solutions, solutions which enable you to build, really, really, really clean experiences for consumers. And I'd love to hear more. Like, what's the pushback that you hear from CFOs?
I think it's more about terminology. So as a commercial person, I'm talking about that friction. And no, of course, people don't want to see friction. But the CFO then looks at what the chargeback rates are and says, actually, no, we need to put in more controls to reduce the fraud rates. But as a commercial person, I'm desperately trying to open it up so I can sell as much as possible.
Yeah. That's a great point. And that, you guys will all experience this in different ways. The sort of perennial knife edge that we all tread on between risk and conversion in e-commerce. I think the way that we try and solve that ourselves is by improving the quality of our fraud engine. And the more data that you're seeing, the more transactions that you're processing, the better you can get at that dimension. And so for me, I think I would probably not try and solve that problem through more steps in the checkout, but rather through the smartness of the fraud engine. And again, for us, we serve some really, really, really big e-commerce sellers. So the likes of Shein, for example, use our product for payment acceptance, and that gives us a lot of comfort and confidence when it comes to fraud because we see the data that allows us to optimize the engine accordingly.
And do you see lots of different fraud levels across different territories conducted in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, the frontier of fraud is always moving. I'd love to say that as a payments business, you have a static battle that you're fighting, but as all of you will know, people are ingenious, and the limits of your ingenuity are, less and less present, especially given the way in which things like AI are coming into that world. So I think, of course, you see the differences in particular types of verticals, geographies, even customer types, transaction sizes, and the value of the engine is being able to bring all of those dimensions together in a way that allows you as a merchant to be able to set your parameters and allows us as the PSP or allows any PSP to be able to navigate that trade.
Let's take it back to a more positive side. Let's start. You've used the term globalization a lot. What does that mean for you as an organization?
Yeah, we're a super global company. So we're 1,400 people around the world across 20 offices. And so relative to most businesses of our stage and size, we are way, way, way more distributed. So I lead a team here across EMEA in London, Amsterdam, Tel Aviv, Vilnius. We have offices across Asia, including in mainland China. We have offices across North America as well. And so from our point of view, when we think about globalization, it's about being where our customers are. It's about making sure that we give them the coverage of infrastructure and support that they need. And it's also about making all of those things as seamless as possible, because we were talking about this in the beginning. Frankly speaking, all of us in tech world, all of us in fintech world get so excited about all the things that we're doing from a product perspective. And I would love to think that all of you guys care. I know that you don't, and that's okay. I've come to terms with that. I'm at peace with myself. What we need to do for you is kind of hide that complexity, take away all of the idiosyncrasies of doing business in the UK and Europe and the US and APAC, and give you a really simple interface that allows you to transact where you need to around the world. And so for us, it's be where you are, build the infrastructure, and then simplify as far as we can to make it easy to do business.
As there aren't many of you, is there anyone who'd like to ask a question?
Come on,
Come on.
one question. Yeah, go on.
Thank you. Are you seeing increasing demand from either end customers or merchants for account-to-account payments? Payments from the customer's bank account as an option or alternative to cards or wallets, for example?
Yeah, so for anyone who couldn't hear that, the question was, are we seeing more demand for account-to-account payments? I'd say yes, but it's a qualified yes. So we actually partner with TrueLayer. TrueLayer is also one of my customers. And the reason we did that was because we wanted to be able to offer access to PIS as a complement to our existing payment services. I think in reality, we're still in the pretty early stages of adoption of open banking payments. The quality and consistency of those payment experiences still vary quite significantly, and the level of trust that consumers have in them, I think, is still growing. When you look at the data shows a really significant expansion in open banking transactions year over year, but we're also still in a world where it was only 5 years ago that debit cards crossed cash as the #1 payment method in the UK. So I think, again, those of us who live in fintech world love to get excited about the new frontiers of payment technology. The reality is consumers are still on the journey to get comfortable with it. And so I think it's important to have it, but I wouldn't hang my hat on it just yet.
And look how long it took us to get from a card not present situation where we were trying to get a little plastic card to work online, and then reducing the fraud that's associated with that. And then the pain that we're still facing with some of that when you've got two-factor authentication built into the mix. So I think, yeah, I'd agree. Open banking has got a lot of opportunity, and you've probably already seen it with credit cards, where you can actually pay your credit card balance off by directly linking with your bank account. But of course, that's two financial institutions talking to each other. It's very different when you want a financial institution to talk to another commercial organisation over which they have very little control.
Yeah. And I think it's also the case in the UK. We're actually pretty lucky. So, as I said, we do business, and I'm around the world a lot. So I'm looking at open banking and equivalent technologies around the world often. I think the UK is really probably the leader right now in terms of quality and consistency. But if you're doing business, for example, in the Eurozone, it's all over the place. And so I'm always quite wary of saying, focus a lot on those kinds of technologies in markets where the quality and consistency and availability of the services isn't as uniformly high as it is here in this market. Obviously, from a cost perspective, there's a big advantage.
So
it's an interesting point you just made about the Eurozone. So let's say for a company that would like to move into
I'm really sorry, we can't hear you at all.
It's coming out the speakers,
okay.
but
how's that? I presume you mean by certain territories within the Eurozone, such as, I don't know, somewhere Eastern Bloc or whatever it might be, versus, you wouldn't mind giving a bit more detail on that?
So the question for anyone who couldn't hear, which included me until 30 seconds ago, was I said the Eurozone was a bit all over the place. So what do I mean by that? I mean that, so in order for open banking to work, you need a level of consistency in the APIs that each of the constituent banks in a particular geography are providing. And in the UK, in general, that's quite high. In the Eurozone, that is very, very variable. And so if you think about the consistency of the API, and then the second thing you think about is the actual experience that you have as a customer, that whole process looks and feels quite different in different places. So you'll get, as you will see if you've done this in the UK, you get kicked out onto another page, you have to then approve it or authenticate it via your bank, and that flow looks and feels quite different depending on where you are. And again, when I talked about differences by territory, I both meant different countries. I also meant different banks within those countries have spent more or less time actually investing in that. So hence my point around still feeling like we're quite early to be able to really lean on that as a payment method.
So although you've got PSD2, which provides some uniformity, you've got SEPA that provides uniformity, you go to France, for example, and you've got multiple regional banks all evolving at their own pace. So yes, they're technically heading towards the same standards, but they're in different parts of that journey.
One more question, go on.
We'll give the speaker one more try.
I was just wondering about cash on delivery payment methods, particularly in the Middle East, and what the trends are sort of showing on the popularity of those.
Yeah, so the question was about cash on delivery in the Middle East. Actually, so I was in Saudi earlier this year, and we're doing quite a lot more business in the Middle East region out of our office in Tel Aviv. There has been an unbelievable transformation in the payments landscape within the Middle East, even over the last 4 or 5 years. So I was sitting down with the Saudi Central Bank and with a few of the folks at Saudi Payments to talk about this. And again, this is just one example, but I think it's more generalized. In the last 4 or 5 years, it's gone from 65% or 70% cash on delivery, 30% online payments, to the inverse in 4 or 5 years. So we're now 75% online payments and only 25 to 30% cash on delivery. And that trend is only accelerating. And so that's why I think there's so much interest and excitement in the Middle East from an online payments perspective, because the growth is there. You also have the demographic drivers, so young, vibrant populations, and populations which have high levels of disposable income, which those of us in the sick man of Europe and Europe more broadly are not necessarily so used to. So I think cash on delivery is still there, but all the data I've seen suggests that it's rapidly decreasing as a share of the total.
So as a merchant, you can look to try and encourage people selecting the payment option that suits you. And yes, you're probably still offering some cash on delivery service, but you're actually raising the profile of your online payment service along the way.
Yeah, and it's also more secure. Like, there's so many reasons why you'd want to do that. So I think in a world where cash on delivery was the primary one, and for sure you'd probably want to carry on doing it. But if the wave is going towards online payments and people are already adopting it, then I think you have more and more security as a merchant to be able to offer that, and and expect your customer to be able to meet it.
Well, closer to home, until very recently, Germany was still pay by invoice.
Yeah. Don't get me started.
Excellent. Well, that, I'm afraid, is time for now. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Thank you, Pranav, for your insight. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me, and thanks all of you for braving the 10 a.m. session, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.